السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. قال الله في كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
There are 3 consecutive days in this month in which we commemorate the departure of Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, the departure, according to some narrations, of Abu Talib, the father of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and the uncle and protector of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And also the third event is the Mab'ath, the initiation of the mission of our Holy Prophet. And tonight I want to give a little bit of a reflection on the life of our 7th Imam, Al-Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, who was born and departed in a time of turbulence. He was born on the 7th of Safar in the year 128 after Hijrah. And he was born outside of the city of Medina in an area called Abwa. His mother was Hamida, his father, of course, the 6th Imam, Al-Imam Ja'far bin Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and he passed away in Baghdad in the year 183 after Hijrah on the 25th of Rajab. And the Imam, after a period of relative stability. What I mean by relative stability, of course, that's also taken into context, comparing to the period that came before that. You had the period of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, which was not so stable. After that, you had a period of relative stability. Things calmed down after Ashura. The 4th, 5th, and 6th Imams were all born and raised and lived and passed away in the city of Medina. The 7th Imam born in Abwa outside of Medina, but from him onwards, the Imams, you notice, had to move from one place to another. So the 7th Imam born in Medina, but he had to move towards the end of his life to Baghdad. The 8th Imam born in Medina moved to Khurasan. The 9th and 10th and 11th Imams in Baghdad and Samarra. So relatively unstable. And a lot of this had to do with the political situation. So you notice that when the 7th Imam was born in that year, during the year 128 after Hijrah, it was a transitional period. It witnessed the fall of the Umayyads and the rise of the Abbasids. So the first thing that we notice in the life of the Imam was that he was raised completely under the tutelage of his father, Al-Imam Ja'far bin Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi salam, who became the father of the Ja'fari school of thought, the Ja'fari madhab, in that his time witnessed an era where he was able to preach and teach the teachings of his forefathers, the teachings of his ancestors. There's an interesting event. Of course, during that period, we saw a rise in scholarship, not only from the Ahlul Bayt school of thought, but other schools of thought as well. So one day, it's said that Abu Hanifa came to the 6th Imam, Al-Imam Ja'far bin Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and as he was waiting, he saw the Imam Musa al-Kadhim, who was a young man, maybe a boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old. And so the Imam had heard certain things. Abu Hanifa had heard certain things. that the Imam also had children that were knowledgeable. Not only was he, the sixth Imam, knowledgeable, but he had children that were knowledgeable. So he finds the young Imam and he asks him a question. He poses to him a very important question. A question which plagues us until today is, are we in control of our actions or are we not in control of our actions? And who's in control of our actions? And if so, how much control do we have and how much control do we not have? So he decides to test the young boy and he asks him that question. He says, when it comes to disobedience, who's in charge? Are we in charge or is God in charge? Because if you just read the verses of the Quran, well, some verses imply that we are in charge of our actions. Some verses imply that no, God is in charge of the natural causes and effects and the actions on this world. Surah Al-Waqi'ah reminds us of that in a number of places. أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ النَّارَ الَّتِي تُورُونَ أَأَنْتُمْ أَنْشَأْتُمْ شَجَرَتَهَا أَمْ نَحْنُ الْمُنْشِئُونَ. God says that if you look to the fire that you create, are you, human beings, and this is a rhetorical question, are you the ones that created that tree? Are you the ones that planted that seed and sprouted that tree and had control over its growth and its creation? Or are we the controller? Are we the creator? It's a rhetorical question. God is saying that we are in control of these natural causes. So the question naturally becomes is, do we believe in predestination or do we believe in free will? And there are different schools of thought that have come about in the centuries that followed after the advent of Islam, which suggested either way. Some said that no, we're not in control at all. Some said that no, we are in complete control. Some said that there's no need to even pose this question. Why? Because God's will is everything. So there's nothing that's different than, nothing that happens in this world that's not God's will. So you don't even have to ask the question, are we in control or are we not in control? But anyways, Abu Hanifa asks Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, a young boy at that time, he asks him this question. So the Imam answers him. He says that if it's completely God, then what's the result of that? If God is the source of our disobedience, then what's the result of that? The result is that God would be punishing us for something that we have no control over. And that doesn't make sense. For a just God, it doesn't make sense. Maybe for some other unjust God, but for the God that we're talking about, unless we're talking about different gods here. Maybe we're talking about different gods. But if we're talking about the same God, it doesn't make sense for him to punish you for a disobedience that he was in control over. He says, so that's number one. Number two, if it was us and God equally, if we're equal partners in this venture of disobedience, then that still doesn't make sense. Because, how could one partner do something and then the other partner suffers? That's not a right relationship. There's something going on there. Usually when in a partnership, in a proper partnership, when one partner suffers, the other partner should suffer. In any proper partnership. So that, we rule that out as well. He says that, so that's option number two. Option number three, and again, this is Imam Musa al-Kadhim saying to Abu Hanifa, answering this question. He says, so option number three is that we are in control of our obedience and our disobedience, and it's God who is in control of reward or punishment. And that's really the only option that truly makes sense, is that we are in control of our obedience and our disobedience, and that God is in control of either reward or punishment. Now, God being in control of reward or punishment, so some might take that and say, okay, well, God can now take you for something that you've done good, some obedience, and punish you. Theoretically, that's correct. Theoretically, but God does not do that, because it goes against some of his prime attributes, justice, adala. Then we would not believe in adala, as some Muslims do not believe in adala, whereas we believe in adala. And so Abu Hanifa was, he was satisfied with this answer. So from a young age, the seventh Imam was trained under the tutelage of his father. So it began to become more clear throughout his life that who would be the true successor of the Imam. And the true successor, the true measure was determined by what? It was determined by knowledge and the ability to serve. Because the seventh Imam also had the sixth Imam also had other sons, other children, sons and daughters that were also very knowledgeable. But to be appointed as an Imam, which we believe is a divine decree and decision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a number of things. Among them is the ability to also serve the people, right? So, the reason why I mentioned this verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, verse 134. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. There's certain verbiage in that verse. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ. كَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظ refers to what? And because one of the one of the names that the Imam was known by, his name was Musa ibn Ja'far, but he is known as Musa al-Kazim. And of course the Imams are also known by their kunya. Kunya is an Arabic term for Abu Fulan, you're the father of this person. So when you read the narrations, to give you a more clear picture, if you're not familiar with this, when you read the narrations, usually the narrations, when they're ascribed to an Imam, they'll mention the Imam by his kunya. So, for instance, the narrations that are attributed to Al-Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Al-Imam al-Baqir is known as whom? Abu Ja'far. That's Al-Imam al-Baqir. Al-Imam al-Sadiq is known as whom? Not Abu Musa, no. Al-Imam al-Sadiq, Abu Abdullah. His oldest son's name is Abdullah, who is actually mentioned in his will. We'll get to that. Abu Abdullah. Al-Imam al-Kazim alayhi salam was also known not just by one kunya. And there's a reason why he wasn't known by only one kunya. His kunya was what? Abu al-Hasan is one of them. And he's also known as Abu Ibrahim. And he is also referred to as Al-Abd al-Salih. Now you may be asking, well, why? Why is it that they're referred to by so many kunyas? Why couldn't they just say Musa al-Kazim or Musa ibn Ja'far? That's because they lived during a time, politically, where there was so much pressure that the Imams had instructed their followers to not even refer to them by name or by any close reference, lest they be punished for being considered amongst the followers of the Imam. So they had to speak in code. They had to become very creative. That's why when you read the narrations, there's not one name or one title or one nickname that's used for this Imam. Imagine having a friend or being a follower of someone, and you're living in a situation where there's so much pressure that you're not even able to mention that person's name. That gives us a little bit of the idea of the political climate that existed at that time. But he was known as Al-Kazim, and the Quran talks about the believers. So that's chapter 3, verse 134. 133 says, وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And the translation of that is, and hasten unto forgiveness from your Lord. So hasten, don't be complacent about it. It's something that's readily available, go for it. Don't wait. And hasten unto forgiveness from your Lord. And hasten also for a garden whose breadth, meaning its width, its extensiveness, is the heavens and the earth. So it's giving a description of what the heaven looks like, and how wide it is, how extensive it is. It's as big as the heavens and the earth, meaning the skies and the earth. It's said that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he received a letter concerning this verse, because this verse is this idea that the heavens is as big as the earth and the skies. It's mentioned, it's repeated a few times in the Quran. And so the Prophet receives a letter from Heraclius, who was the ruler of the Byzantine Empire. He says that if you describe the heaven and the earth to be that big, then where's the hellfire that you talk about? Meaning that there's no room. If it takes up everything, then there's no room for the hellfire. So the Prophet Muhammad responded to him. He said, glory be to God, subhanallah. He says, what happens to the night when day comes? And what happens to the day when night comes? It's the same setting. You're sitting in your backyard, it's day, all of a sudden it's night. It's the same setting. The same way you can choose a different background, different setting for your phone. It's the same phone, but it's a different setting. So the reply was a rhetorical question. It was a question to make him understand what the answer is. Is that yes, it's as expansive as the heavens and the earth, the Jannah that is described in the Quran. But the hellfire is just a different setting. It's a different mode. And you choose in this life, whether it's either one. There's a narration. It says that the grave, al-qabr, it describes the grave. It says that it's either rawdatun min riyad al-jannah or hufratun min hufar al-nar. That it's either a garden from the gardens of paradise or it's a pit from the pits of hellfire. So you get to choose. The next verse says, alladina. So this verse is also describing the people that their reward is that heaven, that's extensiveness. Its width is the heaven and earth. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ. Those who give in times of ease as well as in times of pressure, in times of poverty. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ. Those who curb their anger. And it's a very particular word, al-kadhim. What does that mean? That comes from an Arabic term which refers to, if you've ever drank out of a canteen, there's a cap. So the canteen is made out of a skin, and in order to close it so that the water doesn't pour out, there's a cap that you can place on it. That cap, to place that cap on a canteen, is called kadhm, kadhama. So if you can think about it visually, what it means to not just to hold back your anger, but it's a person who has anger boiling in them. It's about to pop out in the same way if you were to overfill a bottle or if you were to overfill a canteen, but you put a cap on it. You know, when you want to tell someone to be quiet, you tell them put a lid on it. It's being able to put a lid on your anger. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ. And they follow that. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. The ones who are easy to forgive people. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. God loves the good doers. So he was known by that title because he was able to curb his anger. He was able to hold back and not lash out, which is the typical human emotion. It's the typical human reaction is to react in the same way that you've been treated, the same way you receive it, you can give it back. And that attribute is reflective of the characteristics of all the Imams. You know, they were all in a position, and by the way, forgiveness only makes sense when you are in a position to forgive, when you are in a position to demand. What does that mean? You know, sometimes, most of the time in our life, we're demanding things from people with a sense of entitlement, as if we deserve something. Imagine if a mother prepares dinner, lunch and dinner and breakfast, day after day after day, and usually there's a set time for that dinner to be prepared, 6 p.m., for her family, for her children. Imagine if one day it wasn't ready at 6 p.m., it was ready at 6:30 or 6:45. Does it make sense for her child to come in and say, why isn't dinner prepared? And it's okay, I forgive you for dinner not being prepared? Does that make sense? You're not in a position to forgive. So most of the time in life, we're not in a position to forgive. We're not in a position to demand, but we're always demanding. We're demanding things from God even if though we're not in a position to demand. we're not in a position to receive. And we read that in the dua of the month of Rajab. يَا مَنْ يُعْطِي مَنْ لَمْ يَسْأَلْهُ وَمَنْ لَمْ يَعْرِفْهُ. O he who gives to the one that doesn't ask and the one that doesn't even know him. If you don't know God, do you truly have a sense of entitlement? If you haven't established a proper relationship with God, then why do you have a sense of entitlement and demand, as if God owes you something? God doesn't owe you anything. And most of the time we roam around, we're demanding things from people, and we have a sense of entitlement when they don't owe us anything. So forgiveness is only meaningful when you're in a position to forgive. And when you look at the lives, you study the lives of the Imams, they were always in the position to forgive. Imam Ali alayhi salam, in one hadith, he says that if you have been given power over your opponent, if you've been given power over your enemy, out of a sign of thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to anything that you owe that person, but out of a sign of thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what should be your reaction? Forgiveness. Meaning that once you've been given that power, you relinquish that power. There are many stories in the lives of the Imams that reflect that attitude. One that I've mentioned several times is when a man came to our fourth Imam, Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. And the Imam was finishing up his worship session. He would spend hours in worship. So the man came to him and he asked him, he said, "Are you Ali ibn al-Husayn, the one they call Ali ibn al-Husayn?" He said, "Yes." And the man began to insult him. He began to insult him. He went off on him. He said, this is what's wrong with you, and you have this bad characteristic, and this and that, and this and that. And the Imam remained patient the whole time. And the Imam's reaction after he went quiet, after he got tired and went quiet, he said, "That's what you know. What you don't know is even worse." So all of a sudden, the Imam, this man felt terrible that he had reacted in this way. He said, when he saw that reaction, he said, I bear witness that you are the descendants of Rasulullah. He said, based on that reaction, I bear witness that you are the descendants of Rasulullah, truly. And the Imam then began to ask about him. He said, "Why are you here? What brought you here?" He said, "In all honesty, I came here and I ran out of provisions and I needed help, financial help. And I went to a group of people and they told me that, you see that man over there, Ali ibn al-Husayn? If you can trigger him, if you can get him to insult you, if you can get him to not hold back, if you can get him to release his anger and his wrath, then we'll give you X amount." He said, "That's the only reason." He said, "I wish you would have came to me first." He said, "I would have given you whatever you needed without the burden of having to insult anybody." He gave him, and he let him go. So being able to curb, he was in a position. He was definitely in a position. And the Imam had an entourage with him. He was in a position to let out his anger. He was in a position to let out his wrath, but he chose forgiveness over that. And that's what the Quran describes, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, the people that are able to put a cap, they're able to put a lid. And the seventh Imam, when you read his life, narrations tell us that he spent years in the prison of Harun. He spent years in that prison with very little contact with the outside world. But still, even under those harsh conditions, he still taught to the best of his ability. He still communicated to the best of his ability. Some narrations tell us that they even developed a code language where they would use one letter. He would use one letter, and of course this language was not with anyone. It was only with the elite of the companions, those who were closest to him. That all he would need to use is one letter for them to understand an entire page, an entire paragraph. That's the kind of relationship that he had established, to where communication was that strong. But for many years he lived, and his attitude when he was in prison was not an attitude of spite. It was not an attitude of rage. It was not an attitude of anger. His attitude, and he expressed this through his dua, he said, "Oh Allah, I have been waiting for a very long time to be in solitude so I can dedicate myself to worship. Jail, prison, this is the opportunity that I've been waiting for my entire life. Because now nobody's going to bother me as I worship you." He saw it in a completely different way. You know, there's an interesting, there's something interesting that was said by, and I've mentioned this name a few times before, Viktor Frankl. He was a survivor of the Holocaust, and he was a psychiatrist, and he came out and wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he says something. He says that suffering, human suffering, he talks about human suffering. He says suffering ceases to be suffering once we have a clear picture of it. The reason why you're suffering is because you don't have a clear picture on life, because you can't see the big picture. But if you could see the big picture, you would understand that this isn't even suffering at all. Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam says that this jail, this prison time is not suffering. It's the exact opposite. I've been waiting for a time like this so that I could dedicate myself wholeheartedly to worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas today, his followers, us, number one, is that we see worship time as if it's prison time. And we try to lessen the sentence, if you know what I mean. We try to lessen the sentence. We try to make it as short as possible. The Imam was saying, thank God I have so much time on my hands now that I can dedicate myself to worshiping God. The exact opposite. And then he notified Harun, because Harun was sometimes in communication. He wanted to see how can I, again, he's known as Al-Kadhim, Kadhim al-Ghayth, the one who curbs his anger. How can I break that title from him? How can I bring him down to my level? How can I cause his anger and rage to be public? So he would communicate with him. And the Imam said something so profound to him one time. He said, Harun, he said, don't think that my misery is eternal and your bliss is eternal. He says, all of it's temporary. He says, every day that I spend in prison, every day that I spend in prison, every day I spend in captivity, every day I spend in torture and what you consider to be public humiliation is one day closer to the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So every day of my misery that passes is one day closer to your misery. So you're having fun now. But on the day of judgment, we will both stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the just, al-hakam al-adl, the one who doesn't forego anything, the one that does not forget anything. So what you consider to be my misery is not my misery at all. In fact, it's your misery, because it's only temporary for me, where you will have eternal misery after the day of judgment. So see that the attitude that the seventh Imam teaches us is that everything that we see as misery in this life, everything that we see as humiliation and torture is very temporary. And if you've truly been wronged, and many of us, you know, sometimes we're wronged, and I don't talk about being wronged from the outside world. Sometimes it's within your own family. Sometimes it's from a family member, a cousin, a relative, a parent, a sibling, a son, a daughter, a nephew. Someone has wronged you. Maybe this person has passed away. Sometimes some people tell me of family members that wronged them and they've passed away 20, 30 years ago. So every day that you spend in misery, if you've truly been wronged, is one day closer to the day of judgment. It's one day closer to the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us in these final few nights of the month of Rajab, and to prepare for us the months of Sha'ban and Ramadan in blessings and mercy. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring relief to all of those across the world, to all of those who are in need of our supplication, to our friends, our family members. There are a few people that within our community that are suffering from different challenges, different illnesses. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring relief for them, to restore their health fully, and to bring relief to their families, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.